Hey everybody. You know, I probably have done a video about this. I basically did a video about this before, but I thought I'd kind of do it again. Sort of an updated, more 720 HD version. But I want to talk about the Game Boy Player. Now, for some of you that may not know what the Game Boy Player is, it's an accessory, an attachment, if you will, a Gamecube accessory that was sold basically later on after the Gamecube was released. You see, on the bottom, well, you have to unscrew these two things here, but on the bottom of the Gamecube was a connection. Now, the connection, obviously, for that Gamecube originally was for Ethernet, for basically Internet, for online play, or online communication of some kind. That's basically what was originally planned for. But it wasn't the only thing it was planned for. You see, it also was planned for this, right here on the bottom, the Game Boy Player. Now you might say to yourself, well, what is the Game Boy Player? Well, let me give you a bit of a history lesson. When the Game Boy first came out in 1989, ever since even the first time people set their eyes on a Game Boy, they've always wanted to play those Game Boy exclusive games, or those Game Boy adaptions games, if you will, on the big screen. Well, a few years later, Nintendo gave them that opportunity with the Super Nintendo and the Super Nintendo accessory, the Super Nintendo accessory, the Super Game Boy. The Super Game Boy was basically like the Game Boy Player. The only difference was when you would the Game Boy, the Super Game Boy Player, the Super Game Boy was basically like a cartridge game. So basically you would put the cartridge into your Super Nintendo just like you would do a Super Nintendo game. And then you would take your Game Boy or Game Boy Color game, and yes, Game Boy Color was around at that same time, and you would stick it into your Super Game Boy cartridge and thus be able to play your Game Boy game or Game Boy Color game, I believe, on your Super Nintendo. Yeah, you were able to do that. The only disadvantage, I think, was you had the screen look like a Game Boy screen with the name Super Game Boy underneath. Basically the screen boxed in almost like a Game Boy, if you will, kind of boxed in like a Game Boy, and like I said, with Super Game Boy underneath it, and right in the middle would be your game. Just as if you were playing it on a Game Boy, except you would be playing on TV. Well, that lasted for quite some time, and it was a novel idea. It was a very novel idea. However, when the GameCube came around, Nintendo decided to fix that. And how did they fix it? Well, because of the fact that technology had gotten more advanced at that time, they decided, why not do it a little bit more different? So, just like the Game Boy, the Super Game Boy, you did need two things. Yeah, hold on, I'll tell you about that in a second. Again, like I was saying, you would need two different things at that time. Two different individual things. One, of course, you would need the Game Boy Player. Now, like I said, these screws underneath, once you unscrew them, well, basically these screws underneath, all you would have to do is screw them onto the bottom of your GameCube. Basically, there's a device. Matter of fact, maybe I should show you guys. Let's see. I think I have something here that's easy to make it easy without any difficulty whatsoever. basically you would unscrew these almost to where you can unscrew them, like that. Get those little screws there. Sometimes they're hard to do, especially if you don't have a screwdriver on you. You want to make sure you get the screws out, or kind of loosen the screws just enough to pull the thing off, because it'll allow you to do that. There we go. But under here, right here, you used to have something, right? Under here was, I can't remember what I did with it, it was a regular cover-up. And this basically would connect originally to the internet, if I remember correct. And you got this under here that does the same thing. You got internet and you got an adaptation. So they were already ready for either an adaptation for the internet on both sides. Either it was here, which I think is more for your multiplayer stuff. If I can read this correctly. Oh, this is your. Oh, this is your Oh, these are your serial ports, whatever those are. I have to look it up, but these here, these little things are your serial ports on your GameCube. I have to look that up. Didn't know about that yet. And then this here, again, was another port, but this was more like, I think, adapted for what would be the Ethernet or whatever. So the Ethernet would originally be put here or in any one of these locations, but mostly here. But due to the fact that the Ethernet, didn't happen, another adaptation came, another use for this came with this. This is basically the GameCube. This is basically the GameCube's Game Boy Player. As you can see, you have your adaptation right here, where you connect it into your Game Boy, and your screws, of course. And basically what this does is, again, maybe I can give you a side view here. Basically what you would do, because you have this adaptation here and this connection here, is you would connect those in, just like that, like putting together a puzzle, and then very carefully try to screw the screws back in. Because if there's one thing you don't want to do, you don't want to have anything loose when you're playing your Game Boy Player. There you go. Of course you'll want to test your GameCube after that anyway, but it's pretty much durable. Now what you do after that, again, just like the original Super Game Boy, it takes two necessary things to work. It takes two necessary things to work. One, it takes, first of all, the Game Boy Player to be connected onto your GameCube. Second of all, it takes a disc. Yeah, it takes a disc. This comes with your Game Boy Player. And this is the startup disc. So what you do is you put the startup disc, just like you would any GameCube game, into your GameCube, shut it, and then you take any Game Boy Color, any Game Boy any original Game Boy or Game Boy Color, or even more importantly, what this was made for, Game Boy Advance game. So basically, any original Game Boy, GBC, Game Boy Color, or GBA, Game Boy Advance game, and you stick it in, turn it on, and your game will start. Now, one of the options it does give you is with your controllers. You can actually keep it, you can actually switch in between. I think you use the Z button for this. You can actually switch using the Z button from basically what it would look like on a Game Boy Advance screen, or to what it should look like if it was a regular game being played on your television. So you got that option just by pressing the Z button on your GameCube controller. Now, the way you get your games out, especially if you have advanced games in there, is you got this little switch here. You got this little switch here. And what it does, just switch it like that, pull it forward, and it makes it easier for your games to come out, especially if you got the GBA games. Now, as innovative as that is, it does have one disadvantage. As innovative as it is, there's one disadvantage. See, back in the mid-2000s, or early to mid-2000s, Nintendo and Game Boy, Nintendo along with the Game Boy Advance, decided to bring out essentially what was known as the Game Boy Advance Video. In other words, little GBA port games, if you will. Hold on. Basically, like I was saying, around the mid-2000s and early to mid-2000s, Nintendo decided to bring out what was known as the GBA-V. In other words, the Game Boy Advance video cartridges. And basically what they were 2 episodes of a show, mainly for kids, or now known as a, or as they're now known as a Toonami zone, or not Toonami, but Vortex show. They would take any one of those shows, whether it was Sonic X, Yu-Gi-Oh, or whatever show was popular at that time, and they would port 2 episodes, just like they used to do on a VHS. They would port them onto cartridges, just like this. And it would allow you to basically put them into your Game Boy Advance. It would allow you to put them into your Game Boy Advance or your Nintendo DS. Switch it on, and you could watch basically Sonic the Hit. You can watch Sonic X. Essentially. In fact, I'll give you an even better example. Let me go get the DS. Let me check my time. I got about a 29-minute limit on this thing. Well, like I was saying, whether it's the GBA here or even the DS. I don't know about the 3DS or the XLs and all that. That if they have this, if they have the backwards compatibility. But what you would do is you would set it into there. Turn on your GBA or your DS. And depending on, like with the DS, depending on what screen you wanted, preferably you'd want the top screen. Take out your stylus pen. Choose that, and of course, like I say, I go with the top screen. It says not compatible with Game Boy Player. And then it is by Majestico. See? And that's basically what a GBAV, as I call it, is basically by Majestico. But again, the only problem with that is, but the thing again, is that's the disadvantage this has. As it said on there, it's not compatible with, it's not compatible with the Game Boy Player, which, believe it or not, there were some fans, if not a good amount of fans, that were disappointed with that. Again, like I said, there was I'm pretty sure a good amount of fans that were disappointed with that. I mean, why would you have fans shell out about $12 or $13, if you will, $10 to $13 in my opinion, for something that you cannot have compatible with your Game Boy Player? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's the only disadvantage it has. All the other games, all the other features are pretty well down packed. So that's pretty good. So that's pretty good when you consider it. And that cost originally when I bought it, I think around $30, which isn't bad. Very affordable. A very affordable price, if you will, for something like the Game Boy Player. Very affordable. Not that I can think of anything else that could be as affordable in the past. You know what I'm saying? But very affordable. I'm pretty sure that's probably as much, if not a little bit more, than what the Game Boy, Super Game Boy cartridge cost when it came out. But again, that was basically the next evolution in that process by Nintendo. And again, the reason they went with the Game Boy Player is because they had because of the fact that technology had evolved so much at that moment, at that time, that you didn't have to, just put a cartridge into a cartridge and just play the game, play your Game Boy game on your TV, which was great, but have to look at it with the screen, but have the screen filled up with basically a Game Boy screen with a Game Boy-like screen in front of you which says Super Game Boy. This actually allows you to avoid that if you wanted to, and just play it as if you were playing a regular SNES game or NES game or Nintendo, or a regular GameCube game. It allowed you to do that, which was good. Some games though are a little broke. Some games are really not meant to be, in my opinion, portable adaptations, unless you can really work the system well. One of the games I have is WWE Survivor Series. And let's just say it's not easy to pick up, especially with this or even the DS, or even the GBA, or the Game Boy Player, because it's not, to me, it's not a game. To me, wrestling games, if not fighting games overall, are just not meant to be ported to portable players, to portable devices. I just don't see them, as portable games. I'm surprised Street Fighter 4 has been adapted to the 3DS and all that, but still, I feel fighting games don't need to be ported onto portable gaming devices. The best to be ported, if not basically debuted on regular devices like Xboxes and Wii's and whatever, and PS3s and whatever you want to get them at. But the point is the Game Boy Player was definitely that next step in evolution for Nintendo when it came to dominating, as James put it in his recent AVGN video, dominating the portable gaming market. Because they didn't just want to dominate portable gaming, they wanted to prove that you could take your portable games and you could play them on your big screen. And they went out and they proved it. But you see, Nintendo's always had a fight though when it came to the portable gaming market. They've always had a fight. You see, when the Game Boy came out, and then they brought the Super Game Boy out for the Super Nintendo, other consoles like TurboGrafx, like Hudson with TurboGrafx, and Sega with the Sega Genesis, decided that they could do better. And how did they prove that? Well, even though they were mediocre successes, not really successful, but mediocre successes, they brought out two portable gaming systems of their own. One was the Turbo Express, I believe, or Duo, or whatever it was called. And basically this portable system, which was Hudson's answer to the Game Boy, allowed you to take your actual TurboGrafx 16 games, put it into the back of your Turbo Express or Turbo Duo, whatever it was called, and play them on the road. The other additional feature is they allowed you to also watch television, but you would have to get like an adaptation or something like that, like an antenna to connect to it, and then you can watch television on the road. The same thing with Sega. Sega brought out the Sega Nomad, and why? It was their answer of saying, "Hey, Nintendo, you think you can dominate and prove you can take portable gaming on the road? Guess what? We're going to dominate. Basically, we're going to prove you wrong again. We're going to dominate over you again, and we're going to do so by bringing out the Nomad, and we're going to show you can take your 16-bit games on the road." And that's basically what it was. Both companies wanted to prove, especially Sega, wanted to prove to Nintendo that yeah, portable gaming was the way to go, but you could do it by it could be done at the same time. But it could also be done in a way that would allow you. It could also be done in a way that would allow you to take your actual games, like your Sega Genesis games or your TurboGrafx games, on the road and play them. Another advantage, and just like I think Turbo Express or Duo, another thing Sega said, hey, they had an advantage on. They felt they had an advantage on with the Nomad, and especially the Game Gear, if you will, was the fact that you could buy a separate connection, a separate antenna, that just like the Super Game Boy Player or the Super Game Boy, you could connect like a cartridge into both systems individually and watch television. Those are basically the additional features that both companies felt would get them over the top, and help them become the dominant force in all of the gaming markets, especially the portable gaming market. And the Game Gear, to me, was the only one that came close to really giving the Game Boy, Nintendo's Game Boy, and its future stuff like the color and then whatever. The Game Gear is the only one that came close to doing that. It was the only one at that moment in time. I mean, you even look nowadays. The DS, the 3DS, the DS XL, the 3DS XL, the DS Lite. They're still getting competition from PlayStation with the PlayStation Vita, and then even before that, the PSP, and now the Vita, if you know what I mean. So there's still competition there, and both are trying to prove more dominant. And the only reason Nintendo, despite how you feel about them right now and what's going on with the Wii U, the reason they're dominant right now in the portable gaming market is due to the fact that their stuff's more affordable. People can afford to buy a 3DS. People can afford to, buy a DS. People can buy these, and nobody would say anything. Nobody would say anything wrong about it because it's the more affordable way to go. But again, back when Nintendo decided to prove their dominance in the portable gaming market by saying, hey, look, you could do your games not just on your Game Boy games, not your Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, not just on the road, but at home. When they started to go in that direction, again, companies like Sega and Hudson decided, hey, we could do better. And they tried proving it by not only bringing out the Turbo Express, which would allow you to play your TurboGrafx 16 games on the road, as well as with the addition of an antenna accessory, watch television. But the same thing with the Nomad. It would allow you to play your games on the road, your 16-bit games on the road, as well as watch television. The only disadvantage that the Nomad had that was improved with the Game Gear is that you needed a reset button. And the Nomad had a disadvantage in that direction because there was no reset button. There was no reset button because basically you would click on the top thinking it's a reset. Instead, it's the off button and you'd have to start over again. And despite what Sega and Hudson and any other company has done, Nintendo has always always had proven and still proves to this day that they're more dominant in the portable gaming market because they're more affordable. They're basically a more affordable alternative to something like a PS Vita, because even though the PS Vita has better graphics and allows you to feel like you're playing your actual PS3 games on the road, the DS and the 3DS are more affordable because of the fact that they are more successful and more dominant because they're more affordable, basically. That's the whole deal. It's more about the money and the cost. And also back in the day when you had the Nomad, you had the Genesis, you had the Game Gear, and back in the day when you had the Nomad and the Turbo Express, unlike the successor to the Nomad, or the one that came around the same time the Nomad did, and proved to be more successful, which was the Game Gear, unlike the Game Gear and Game Boy, the Turbo Express and the Nomad ate up AA batteries like they were nothing. Because basically they were trying to energize a system or give life to a system that played basically home console games on the road. And that's what killed the batteries more than anything. But anyway, that's my review of the Game Boy Player and a little bit of history on why it was made and all that. So hope you all enjoyed that. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Comment below. Let me know what you guys think. Do a video response if you like. I would like to hear from you guys and what your thoughts are on the Game Boy Player and its history of how it got there. And I'll talk to you all later. God bless. Take care. Peace out.